Hi, this is the Learning Loop podcast. Learning Loop is a philosophy and framework that says there's nobody better equipped to solve your problems than you. But you forget a lot of the wisdom, experience, and ideas that you could use to do that. The solution Learning Loop provides is to tackle the problem of forgetting by developing tools you can use to design a system built for you, where you take notes, organize those notes, and then use those notes to answer your questions and solve your problems. You can think of this as your own custom-built book of wisdom. You can stop forgetting what you've learned through experience, through books, through conversations, through introspection, and you can hold on to and use all that valuable experience and wisdom to live a better life. As you listen, you should pay attention to what occurs to you that you could try, improve, stop doing, etc., and then act on those impressions. This podcast and the time that it takes should give you things to try to solve your problems. So every episode, I basically define a specific kind of forgetting problem that we face in our lives. And then I talk about that problem in the abstract, try to define it, try to understand it. And then I talk about what has been a solution for me in the Learning Loop framework and what solutions might look like for you and for other people. And I'll try to talk about general practices and principles that you can use to design your own book of wisdom to solve that particular kind of problem. So the problem that I want to talk about today is forgetting what you stand for, how you aspire to act, and your why. W-H-Y, why. So my goal in this podcast is that I want to convince you to write down and iterate on 3 things: your set of values, your set of principles, and your own vision for your life. So let's talk about what these things mean. What are values? What are principles? And what are vision? Values I think of as the set of things that you care about intrinsically. Like there's not a reason to care about them. You care about them for their own sake. So like, I don't think I would do the walk to work if work weren't waiting on the other side of that walk. There are more beautiful places I could walk, and sometimes there are intrinsically valuable walks, but my walk to work is not a core value that I hold. It's extrinsically valuable, my walk to work. I think of money this way too. Like, I don't care to personally accumulate a ton of money for having money's sake. I care about getting money so that I can buy things and so that I can not starve and so that I can have a roof over my head. And so that would also be a bad example of a value. A good example of a value is like, it feels really good to laugh with my friends. It feels really good to just hug somebody that I love. It feels really good to focus on a problem for a long period of time and make progress on that problem. These are some examples of values that I hold that I don't really understand why they're so important to me, but they are really important to me. So values are things that you care about for no other reason than that you care about them. And it's important to have these values because these dictate what kinds of activities you choose to do with your time, because they should be downstream of your values. And I think that people can get really confused about why they're doing what they're doing because your actions and your values can become out of sync and you can start doing things that aren't downstream of your values, i.e. you don't really care about them. So that's why you should write down your values so that you know explicitly kind of whether you should take something on because it does or doesn't match up with this list of values. And it helps to have it in physical form so that whenever you're faced with the prospect of taking on an additional obligation or making a career choice or making a relationship choice, you can look at those values and you can say, does this or does this not match up? Another reason it's really valuable to have values is that you can read them often to just kind of remind yourself of why you're doing the things that you've already taken on. And so you could forget the reason that you entered into this career path, for example, and maybe reading your values would make clear why you entered into this career path, or why you entered into this relationship, or why you had kids. Maybe those things mesh with your values, and reading your values can be grounding and meaningful for you. Now that we've talked about values, I want to talk about principles. How are values and principles different? Principles I think of as being action-oriented. So the place that I got this principles idea most clearly from was Ray Dalio's book, Principles, which talks about a general framework for being taught important lessons by life through the experiences of pain and joy, basically. So what Dalio says is, he says, if you experience pain, that's basically life telling you you did something you shouldn't have done, which is an interesting interpretation of pain. And I kind of extended that to include joy. Maybe joy is a way that life teaches you what you should have done more of. And so basically his prescription for how to come up with the ways to act in life, the rules for your life, your principles, is to pay attention to what causes you pain and to what causes you joy, and to do less of the former and more of the latter. And so concretely, you might sit there and feel really bored during a meeting, and you might write this down as a pain, a thing that's unpleasant for you, a thing that's painful for you. And then later, you might look at that pain and say, what could I have done to not have that pain? Maybe I could have not gone to the meeting, maybe I could have quit my job, maybe I could have looked at the person who was speaking in the eyes the entire time, maybe I could have brought an agenda to that meeting, maybe I could have written down what the purpose to the meeting was. Like, you could have done a million things. And as you're listing off the things that you could do to feel less of that pain in future meetings, maybe eventually there's going to be like this spark. There's going to be this moment where you're like, ooh, that's the thing that I should have done. And that could be your principle. And for me, an example of a principle that I have around meetings is to bring value to the meeting, as opposed to maybe my natural impulse is to get value from a meeting. And so if I bring value, then it kind of changes my framework of the meeting and what I'm focusing on in the meeting, and it makes it much less painful. So that's a principle in action at work that is effective. So we've talked about values and we've talked about principles. Now let's talk about this third component that I think you should write down and stay in touch with so as to not forget important things. And that is your vision. I think you should write down a vision that consists of specific scenes that really make you feel emotional in optimal ways that you care about. And so, for me, something that makes me feel a lot more special than being in a cubicle or even at this desk, frankly, is the idea of like sitting on a porch of my cabin in the woods with like thick trees all around me, and the sun is low in the sky, and I have a blanket on because it's a little chilly outside, and I have a mug of like chocolatey electrolytes with a little bit of cream mixed into it that I'm sipping, and it's cozy and it's beautiful and it smells like pine. Like, this is a very inspiring scene to me. And for other people, that might be walking down the street of a busy city and feeling the buzz and the energy of all these people walking by you, and you're dressed in really chic clothes, and you're on your way to a meeting to like sell somebody on your product or make a big deal, or I don't know. I don't really know what city people dream about, but imagine for yourself like this inspiring, like end of your life. Where are you going to be in 20 years? Where are you going to be in 30 years? The reason that this is valuable as a way to solve the problem of forgetting is that it's a reason basically for you to be working. It's a reason for you to be iterating towards something, progressing towards something. It's like the reward that you get out the other side of all of this investment of your career or of your relationships. And it's important to have this written down because there are plenty of moments, at least in my life and in plenty of my friends' lives, where we are sitting there about to start working on something and you lose your sense of meaning in it. You lose your sense of why. You think that the whole world is this cubicle or is this desk. And if you can kind of tune in to this beautiful vision that you have, then you can remember, like that's what I'm working towards. That's what I think is really meaningful in my life. That's what's beautiful to me in my life. And as you stay in touch with that, like as you, for example, visualize that vision every single day, you can tap into the energy of that vision and tap into the emotion of that vision. And it's very, very powerful. So the three things that I've talked about, you should write down are values, to remember what matters to you, principles, to remember how to act, to minimize pain and to maximize joy, and then vision, which helps you tap into your grandest why in a way that's a little bit more concrete than values. Values are kind of like these abstract things that are meaningful to you and continually drive you, but the vision is something that ideally would like tap into your physical senses, your sense of smell, your sense of touch, your sense of vision. It's these physical stimuli that you can call out a really powerful emotional experience using. So now that I've talked about this kind of in the abstract, I want to talk about what the solution has looked like for me. So here we are in my note-taking app. It's called Obsidian. And here we are in my daily note for today, Friday, May 17th. And you'll see that I have these different sections. I have a direction section, which kind of has my goals and my focuses for the day. I have a to-do section, which is like my schedule and my tasks for the day. I have a notes section. And from here, I want to show you how I get to my values page that I might use to consult what matters to me on a daily basis. And I do consult this every single day as part of a visualization exercise that I'll tell you about in a minute. So basically we go to the page that I have called values, and you see that there are these sections. There's like a spiritual section, there's a self section, there's a relationship section, there's a professional section, and in each of these sections, there are these values that matter to me intrinsically. So like my top value, my most spiritual value is that I know God, that he exists, and I have an eye single to his glory. So this is the most important thing to me in life, is knowing God. But I also have these self-values. And so, I want to describe this first one as like progress, faith, story, pain, growth mindset. And it's basically the idea that, I basically value the idea that there's a silver lining, that there's meaning, that things can and will get better, that there's a point in struggle and overcoming, that pain is essential to this process. And so this is basically this rough sketch of a value that I have, that I overcome difficulty, and I see the difficulty and the pain as intrinsically valuable to that process. I also have a value around learning. I really care to learn from evidence and sound argument and not ignore or deny the way the world is, but work in harmony with it. And so, I go on and on and on in my relationships values. I have a value of having fun and laughing and being playful. I have a value of loving people in my life. I also have these professional values. So like I really want to work on something that I believe in the mission and that is sustainable and that I really like the team that I'm working with. And physically, I also have values. I want to feel good. I want to play good. I want to look good. And so this is like a list of things that I can always go back to, and I've written them and they're encoded there, and I can always consult them, and they will never change until I change them. So that's really valuable compared to just like having an abstract sense of them in my head and always have these values kind of like shifting around. This is a way that I can stay grounded and anchored to values that I've explicitly decided I want those values, I believe in those values. And so, if, for example, in a relationship, I'm deciding, how do I go forward with this person? Like, what's the most important thing for us to do? Maybe, one value that I've decided to not have there is to, maximize the intellectual power of the relationship or something. I've emphasized instead, I want to have fun, I want to laugh, I want to play, and I also want to love somebody. And so if I'm deciding between two people to date, for example, and one has this love aspect and the fun and the laughter and the playful aspect, but with somebody else I really gel well intellectually, then I can look at this and I can kind of say, like, these are the values that I chose long ago and I've recited to myself every single day. And so that can guide my decision of whether to stay with the one person or with the other person. And so this is an example of my values page that I kind of wrote just by writing down all the values that I could think of. And then over the years, as I have found ones that didn't really resonate anymore, I'll delete them off this list. Or as I think of new ones that are off this list, and like fun, laughter, and playfulness, that was not on this list until maybe 6 months ago. And after a while, I was just like, I think that's missing from my relationships values. I really value fun and laughter and playfulness. So that's how I kind of constructed my values sheet. And then I also have a principles page. And like I said, principles are these concrete lessons that pain and joy taught me of how to act kind of regardless of how I feel. So I have a bunch of different categories of principles. I have like some focus principles, and like I have indecision principles, decide by weighing pros and cons of each decision, and then decide by flipping a coin if it seems like sixes. So if I'm confused and don't know what to choose, then just flip a coin and choose something that way. I also have, these planning principles. So like, instead of just flying by the seat of my pants, plan by doing an intention, executing, and then reviewing my execution of my intended plan. And as I'm going throughout my day and having a hard time making decisions of what to do, what not to do, how to do things, how not to do things, I consult these principles, which are downstream of pains and joys that I've had, for answers to that question. So like, let's go to a really important principle, like grow, have a growth mindset. You see all of these principles have material folded under them. And so when I expand one of these principles, you're going to see that I have a practice section, which is examples of where I've practiced that principle. I also have a support section, which is examples of reasons why I would have that principle, arguments for that principle. And then I also have a pain section where it's the concrete pains that I wrote down at specific points in my life that resulted in this principle. So for this have a growth mindset, if I open up the practice, I have this time that I wrote, this was actually yesterday. I'm feeling anxious, nervous, inclined to think that I can't change, that life will always be this way, that I should have chosen something else, that I should regret something. But I know how common this feeling is and how it can be overcome by living righteously. So I'm deciding in this moment to have a growth mindset. So this was a time that I practiced my growth mindset, and I bring it into this practice section so that I can remember in a year, in 2 years, what happened on May 16th of 2024, the time that I practiced my growth mindset. I also have this support section, and so this is a bunch of like arguments for why I should have a growth mindset. So I say it's realistic because you can grow, it builds character because it's kind of harder, I think, to decide to grow than to not grow. It works to better your experience, so it's effective for improving your life. It's better learning through feedback. Um, so you want to pay attention to what people are saying as they react to your ideas and to your thoughts and to your way of being, and it's better to learn through that feedback. Um, on Monday, May 6th, I wrote, recognize anxiety as an objective state felt so much better than inhabiting it. Okay, so yeah, I'm basically saying, I had anxiety, and to recognize it as like this thing that is happening to me instead of experiencing it and fearing it, um, let me feel a lot better. And that reframe to me in that moment felt like growth mindset. And so that's a support here of growth mindset. I also have a bunch of pains that caused me to write down this principle in the first place. So, on May 10th, I said, any annoyance to you is being blind to something that you could be taught. And so here again, we see this growth mindset theme of seeing something as an annoyance, reframing that, and changing your mind to see it as an opportunity to learn instead of just like a painful thing about life. Or before that, I said, I felt really dumb when I made my suggestions today. And because I felt that pain, I felt on that day that having a growth mindset was the appropriate thing to have done and thought in order to avoid that pain. And I think I wouldn't have felt dumb when I made my suggestions today if I saw them as an opportunity to learn instead of kind of like an opportunity for me to show off how smart I was to my coworkers and my lab mates. And so here's an example, just this example of a principle that I wrote, this have a growth mindset, and I have shown you kind of like the practices, the times that I practiced it, the supports for it, the arguments for it, and also the pains that I experienced that I want to avoid by adopting this growth mindset. So that's how I've done my principles. I also just want to quickly show you my vision board. So I'm just going to read off a couple of sentences here. I wake up early and spring out of bed in the mornings, sheet giving way to rugged floor, onto bended knee, thanking God for this day, which I will use well. I'm eager to get out and begin before dawn when the stars are still out. The smell of morning is crisp, bright, and promising. I love the quiet energy of the mornings, which I go about with vigor. I have things to do. I feel hopeful that I can achieve these things I want. I watch the sunrise each day, praying out of gratitude to God and promising what I will do that day. I use my body, working out hard, sweating, struggling, and feeling pain. After, I take a hot shower or a cold shower and feel the fruit of my labor in pleasure and well-being and satisfaction and fulfillment. So I could go on reading, but you kind of get the idea. Like I've painted this picture of what I do on my ideal day after I've progressed in the way that I want to progress and after I've grown in the way that I want to grow. So this is going to seem random that we're in Apple Music, but the specific way that I use my values and my vision documents is every single morning I do a visualization where I go through those values and I go through that vision board and I read them and I try to think about what they would change about my day to day if I lived by them. Or I try to envision kind of, I like to explore other ways to go through that vision day, which is tiny little changes so that I can kind of like make that a very robust, rich vision. And I do all this listening to music that's really inspiring to me. So like, here's my vision board playlist where I have the Tannhauser Overture, I have also Sprach Zarathustra, I have the 1883 theme, The Planets by Gustav Holst, the Emperor Concerto by Beethoven. These are all like really romantic, inspiring music to me. So I'll spend 5 minutes every morning going over those values and that vision in like a visualization exercise. And so that's something that I couldn't do if I hadn't written down the values and written down the vision to reference and to get in touch with these deep-seated values and, cherished scenes that really inspire and motivate me. So we've talked about values, we've talked about principles, we've talked about vision board, we've talked about my visualization exercise. These are all solutions that for me have totally changed how grounded I am and the level of integrity that I have to the same values and the same vision over time. Whereas in my natural form, I would have basically spent a lot of time in 5 years ago on one vision, and the next year on a different vision, and the next year on a different vision. And I've become very connected to these values and this vision because I've spent so long kind of iterating it and building it and reviewing it and returning to it. And now when I have decisions to make, I will remember parts of this vision. I'll remember parts of these values that inform how I should act. And I love what that does to give me an increased measure of integrity and not make me feel like I'm just like flying by the seat of my pants, letting whatever happen to me. And to me, it all feels like we're solving the problem of forgetting. I would have forgotten these values, or I would have forgotten this vision. And the fact that I've written it down, I can keep going back to it and keep drawing strength and power from it over and over and over again, day after day after day, in this huge long marathon that we call life. So I think the general principles for others to do the same thing is to make your own value sheet, to make your own principles sheet, to make your own vision board. And the way that I would prescribe making a value sheet is literally just write down your most important values, 5 things, 10 things, 15 things, and use them to make decisions or use them to grab motivation. And then as you go on in life and you realize that some of those values you want out, or some of those values are missing from your explicit sheet and you want to add them, decide to add them or decide to take them away. Don't let just like the natural process of forgetting decide what your values are. Like, put them down in writing and return to them and memorize them and use them. There's also this principle sheet that you can make by paying attention to what gives you pain and what gives you joy, and doing less of the former and doing more of the latter. And so, you could make a practice where every single day you write down the things that caused you most pain that day, and then you could write down principles that you could use to have avoided that pain. And if, over the course of time, you're going to realize that a lot of these pains are caused by the same lack of a principle. And so if in a month, and this is basically where I'm at, usually these days when I write pains, I go to my principles and there already is a principle in there for me to solve that pain with. And so I'll take that pain and I'll put it under that principle that already existed. But when I was first starting out in this, there was pretty often a new principle that had to be made by analyzing and assessing this pain. And so I would make a new principle in that case. And principles can get, out of control pretty soon. You can have hundreds or thousands of principles, and then you're not really practicing them that often. And so, every once in a while, I will go through and I will kill the principles that don't have more than 5 supports or pains for them. And that kind of keeps it from blowing up too much. I also have a practice that I do every single day where I practice 5 principles according to the needs that I have in the day. So if I am feeling pain or if I have to make a decision, I will think about what principle directs or dictates how I should act right now. And then I will go and I will grab that principle and I'll copy it into my list of principles that I'm practicing that day, and I'll write down a little bit of how I'm approaching that principle. And then that will be 1 out of 5 of my principles practiced every single day. And this lets me kind of not only build out the support and the grounding for those principles, but it also helps me to live a much more fulfilling, regretless life by abiding by these principles that I've set out for myself. So that's how you can make your own principles. And then For a vision board, I think every time you experience an emotional, powerful scene, whether that's in a movie or in a book or in a podcast or whatever, like jot that down in your vision board and then have a little script that you can read over, maybe to powerful music, maybe in a beautiful place, that can orient you to the beauty of your vision board and to motivate you and help you remember these things that you might forget, which is your why over the course of many months, many years, many decades. So basically, as a review of today, we've talked about a values sheet, a principles sheet, and a vision board sheet for helping you to remember what matters to you and what to do and what it will look like. Reminding yourself of these things, I can tell you from personal experience, is incredibly powerful and is transformative, and it is as impactful and as effective as you will let it be. The more time, to a certain extent, to a reasonable extent, you spend orienting yourself with your higher level whys, the more integrity you will have, and the more you, who are best equipped to solve your own problems, will be able to solve your own problems. So thank you for coming. Please let me know if any of this didn't make sense, if you disagree with any of this, if I rambled too long on any of the sections. I always say constructive criticism is my love language. Thanks for coming.